Welcome. This is the HRM Family Group. My name is Wendy Rogers, and I'm going to be introducing our guest speaker tonight. But first of all, I want to tell you that this is being webcast, and it's going to be archived on the SSNS website. And we are going to have, it's going to be going on for about an hour, and then we're going to have a break. And the second portion of the meeting will be an evaluation and just a chat about personal issues, and that will not be webcast. So for the first hour, we're going to be having a webcast, and then the second hour is going to be not cast. I want to remind you about the conference in October, October 26th and 27th. We've got a poster that Todd is going to show you. The title of the conference is New Perspective, Bright Horizons. It's quite an in-depth process, and it's going to be very interesting. Just a little note here on rates as far as the conference goes. If you only want to attend one day, the rate is $175. If you are an SSNS member, you have a special rate for both days of $245. And if you are in a situation where you would really like to attend the conference but can't afford it, just get in touch with the SSNS office directly and speak to Todd, who should? Diane there, and work something out for you. I'm going to introduce Dani, and she has been a long-time advocate for having the family voice heard in the treatment of a family member or close friend. And as we know over the years, this has been a big problem trying to get information. Dani has also been instrumental in having the health authority recognize the importance of providing education and support to families. She facilitated the Langhouse Family Group for many years. Dani is a trainer and co-facilitator and co-facilitates the Family Matters mental health program. Dani also represents the Family Voice on the Feedback and Evaluation Action Team. I'm going to introduce Dani Himmelman for you, and she'll be conducting the program. Thank you.
Okay. Hi, everybody. Welcome, and thanks for coming. So tonight we'll talk about confidentiality and information sharing guidelines in mental health, and how I think what we'll perhaps start with is just a little bit of history on the guidelines and how they were developed in the first place, because that goes back a little bit. As early as 2009, so that's 7 years ago, the mental health program, and by mental health program I mean all the mental health services, inpatient services and all the outpatient services in at least the HRM, Halifax Dartmouth area, and as far including Sackville, and as far as Hants County. So the leadership in the mental health program recognized that there were issues with family inclusion or family involvement in mental health care, with being involved in the care of their family members. Now, I'm not sure how they knew that. They must have been getting feedback from families somehow. So complaints or something was happening, and they realized it was a significant issue. So the leadership at the time were very interested in doing something about this. So in 2009, they organized having an organization called the Meriden Family Program, which is an organization from the United Kingdom, and it is specifically a training and organizational development program. So they provide consultations around the world for organizations that provide mental health services, and what the consultations involve is coming to the organization and taking a look at, from the perspective of not just the providers, but the patients and the families as well, taking a look at how families are involved, whether they're involved and how they're involved in care. So in 2009, the mental health program organized the Meriden Family Program to come here and do that. So as part of the consultation, they were going to offer, they offered their observations regarding family collaboration, but they also offer skills training to providers if the organization wants to pursue that. And at the end of their consultation, they give recommendations to the organization. So we were all very keen. I was involved in that even way back in 2009. So everybody was pretty excited. Everyone who was involved was pretty excited. So what the mental health program did was organize groups for the Meriden people to meet with. So there were a fairly large group of mental health patients or consumers or clients, whatever people are comfortable with. I think I'm going to call them patients tonight. It's hard to know what the best term is on at any given time. So they organized a pretty good group of patients and also of families. And I believe some of you might have been part of that. It was a pretty good sized group. Were there some people that were part of that when Merida was here? Were any of you? No. Okay. So they met with groups, a group of patients, a group of families, also a group of providers to get the provider perspective on how they felt they included families, and also with leadership. So that would be the CEO and the directors and the managers, all of those people, and get all of their input so that they had a really well-rounded view. And one of their key observations is that confidentiality was the biggest barrier to including and involving families in care. So the providers felt very constrained by what they believed were confidentiality issues around sharing of information. And they felt so constrained that many of them wouldn't involve families even when the patient themselves gave permission for that to be done. So that tells you how deeply ingrained that belief was for at least some of the providers, or a significant number of them. So after they had consulted with these groups, there were a number of recommendations made, and one of those was that as an organization, in collaboration with patients and families, the organization needed to develop clear guidelines around confidentiality and the sharing of information so that providers wouldn't be so frightened, and so they would have some guidelines to let them know what was okay and what wasn't okay. So we started right away to do that. And what I'm going to present tonight will be the main content of those guidelines. Hopefully it was going to make sense. It's a bit complicated in the way that it's presented in the sort of original document about the guidelines. So I've tried to organize it in a way that will be understandable, and and you'll have a takeaway. Do they have copies of it?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you can, basically, I have detailed my slides to an extent that I wouldn't normally do. So you can basically go back and read those slides at any time, 6 months from now, a year from now, and know really in fairly good detail what I said. So, okay, I'd like to add that since the guidelines were developed in 2010, and they were developed by a committee that was organized by the mental health program, kudos to them. It was a committee, I was on it, but there were other families and other patients, and there was a person from leadership, there were providers, and there was even a person from the legal team in the mental health program. So, you know, it was a serious endeavor. We were going to develop these guidelines, and they were going to be legally hold water. So, and since then, those guidelines have been rolled out here in HRM, an area. They're presented at orientation every time new staff begin work in the mental health program in this area. And they've also been presented to any of the families who've attended the Families Matter in Mental Health program, which Wendy referred to. It's an 11-week education program for families that's offered throughout the year in various locations in HRM, basically. So I was going to talk about fee, but I think I'll do that at the end. Let's get into the guidelines. Okay. So, this is page 1. Okay, so just to cover sort of some basic information, I want to kind of build this from the foundation up so it'll make sense for you. Healthcare providers have a duty of confidentiality to patients regarding their personal health information. So that means that they can't share any personal health information without consent. let's work our way down the page. What is personal health information? It's information about a patient's physical or mental health, their treatment, their diagnosis, and any other information that may be gathered by a provider during assessment and care. So it's all of that detailed information, every bit of it. Informed consent is written or verbal permission, which is given by the patient stating what information can and cannot be shared on one from one period of time to another. When they become sick, they may change their minds and want to restrict information sharing, and when they're well, they may be more likely to share information. So this needs to be reviewed frequently. The circle of support includes people that are identified by the patient who provide practical and emotional support, and of course that is typically close family and friends, but it might be broader than that. It could be a minister or a priest, it could be, it could be any number of people that the patient considers close and important to them. And the term provider, when we talk about it, is just a really general term that refers to any of the professionals who are working in mental health. So it includes the obvious, psychiatrists and other doctors. It includes psychologists, social workers, nurses who play a huge role, social workers who play a huge role, and anybody else who's providing care. So it's just a general term. Yes? So any questions at all?
Sure. When you mentioned it's a process, not a one-time event, and that the patient can revoke that consent when they become ill, is there a point at which their revocation would not be accepted? In other words, if you have a patient and when they're not in a psychotic state, they give their consent, and then they're in a psychotic state, they can withdraw that consent, and that's legally binding?
Well, you know what?
Or is it not?
That came up when we were working on the guidelines. And initially we were thinking, you know what? We can use this as exactly the way you said. They can be used in that way, hopefully, where someone gives their consent and then they become ill and they change their mind, and we go with the consent that was given earlier. But there was pushback about that. And so with haggling back and forth, what we've kind of settled on is that people do have the right to withdraw their consent, but providers are really encouraged to keep in mind the fact that this is a process, and to be cognizant of the fact that when patients are unwell, they may become paranoid. They may have delusions that make them fearful of people, and it's often people closest to them. So they need to be representing this consent periodically during the recovery process, and that might be, you need to do it quite frequently if the person is getting well fairly quickly. And we also encourage providers, as that ill person is getting a little bit better, to start thinking about why it might be important to share information with the family. Because that person who's sick may, in their own minds, see no reason to share any of their very personal information with these people who are trying to control them, even though they're close, and we think of ourselves as being supportive. But if they're encouraged through their wellness process to think about, why might I want to share some information? What information would be helpful for my family? What do they actually need? Can they really support me if they have no idea what's going on? And the providers are encouraged to talk about that, talk in that way with patients. Make sense? Mm-hmm. Any other questions at this point? Okay. So, health information can be broadly divided into two categories: public information and personal health information. So if we had a flip chart, I was going to write that down because it's going to get a little confusing as we go along. But just think, public information and personal health information. At the top of the page, two categories. So from there, We talk about public information. Information is information that's available to anyone in the general public. It's not related to anybody specifically. It's not personal, so it doesn't require consent. Providers are expected to support families by sharing public information. That is something that you need to know. Because not every provider is necessarily going to offer you that. Or if you ask for it, not every provider may realize that they really ought to be providing you with good, reliable, accurate information. So if you know that, then your conversation may be able to be different with the provider if you are looking for information. So examples of things that would be public information include the obvious stuff: mental illnesses and addictions, medications, various treatments, mental health services, what's available, coping and communication strategies, also things like relapse prevention strategies, recognizing relapse, self-help groups and other community resources. There's all kinds of stuff there that is public information. It's not confidential. So they should be sharing that with you. That kind of stuff can be particularly helpful when people are, when families are first experiencing mental illness in the family and they may not have a lot of knowledge, and that could be so helpful for the family. So then when we go into personal health information, as we mentioned before, personal health information relates to a patient's mental and physical health, their health care, the family health history, and any other information that's been collected by providers during assessment and care of the patient. So basically, all the stuff that you might want to know is personal health information, unfortunately. Personal health information is all documented in the health record, which is commonly known as a chart. And the chart might be paper, or these days it might well be electronic. But it's basically what you would have thought of maybe previously in your life as a chart. That's all it is. And now, here we get a little bit more complicated. So personal health information. So we've got public information, anybody can have it. Personal health information, not so much. It's going to require consent. But it can be divided into two categories. So even personal health information is divided into two categories. General personal health information and all other personal health information. So the detailed stuff is in the all other personal health information.
So just give me an example of when you say general personal health information. If somebody has a mental health issue, would there be something generally that could be shared?
Yep, I'm going to explain that.
Okay. Oh,
I'm going to explain, and you'll see that there's a reason why it's been laid out this way. It has a purpose. So general personal health information can be shared with the patient's family or friends without consent, okay? But it's very limited information, and it's used only when the patient is unable to give consent, to give direction, and that there's been no previous direction given, okay? So it's limited, but it's not used in every instance. It's only when no consent has been given or there's no record of it. In order to provide this general information, the provider must have reason to believe that the family member or friend who's asking for the information has a close personal relationship to the patient. And that's simply in the most obvious scenario to prevent people like, I don't know, insurance people or employers from calling and getting information that patient really does not want out in the public, public view. If anyone knows about it, it would only be the closest people, right? So that's why that is in there. Now, general information, to answer your question, Wendy, provides very limited information about the current clinical picture, sadly, without reference to the future or the past, includes the following information about a patient. So, their general presence in a hospital or outpatient clinic on that day, their general location, so that means the hospital unit or the outpatient clinic where the patient is receiving treatment on that day, and their general condition, which is limited to describing the patient's current condition using one of 5 phrases without giving any details. And this is where I kind of cringe, but I see, in some senses, I see the purpose of this. So this is if your family member, a scenario that might help illustrate it is Let's say that your family member has been admitted to hospital yesterday. You didn't come in with them. You're concerned about them, and you're calling because you want to know how they're doing. You have no idea how they're doing. Okay? Your family member has not provided consent for you to have information. So all they can give you is this limited information. They can say, when you call on the phone, is my son or daughter named X in your hospital right now? And they can say yes or no, which is better than what might have happened before, believe it or not. They can say where they are, so the unit that they're on. And they can give you some sense of how they're doing. So they can tell you, using these words, whether the person is acutely ill and unstable, whether the condition is the same, hasn't changed, whether it's getting worse, so showing increasing symptoms, getting better, they're recovering and the symptoms are decreasing, or they're better, so in remission or otherwise recovered or stable. So you can do that, you can apply this when a person's in the hospital, and you could call every day. So this information is only to be given out for one day, because you can't go jumping into the future. This is when you get into the nitty-gritty legal stuff. But you could call every single day to say, how's my son or daughter doing today? And then you'll find out, are they getting better or are they getting worse? Are they still there? In other words, have they been, if they're not there, they've been discharged, right? So it's a way of you getting some kind of information and not being in the dark. It is somewhat helpful as well in the outpatient clinic scenario, where if you were concerned and interested, wondering if your loved one had attended an appointment that you somehow thought that they had on December the 5th, and you weren't sure they were going to attend, you could call that clinic on December the 5th and say, is my son or daughter there? Did they attend their appointment? And they could say yes or no. Okay? And you could get this very general information. So it's better than nothing, and you would have gotten nothing before. So note, if the family and friends can only be offered this general information, then they should be offered public information. So that would be in response to questions or concerns, where they could get support and information for themselves. So that's not typically offered, but if you know you're entitled to it and you're feeling that you need information about something, services, supports, whatever, then you can ask for that, and because it's public information, they should give it to you. Okay? And they are a reliable source. I mean, I know we can all get online and find all kinds of stuff, but sometimes you wonder, is this the best page for me to be reading? I don't know what the best organization is to be looking at, so they can tell you that. Okay, so now we move on to all other personal health information. So really all the nitty-gritty detailed stuff that you're probably way more interested in is in this category. So it includes all that information that we've already talked about twice. Families need to know some personal health information, and I'm sure I don't need to tell you this, about the patient in order to be able to provide the best possible care and support to that patient and for our own health and well-being. We need some information. Imagine that your loved one was in a car accident, in the hospital, and discharged home to you, and you don't know if they have broken ribs, or if the leg is broken, how badly it's broken, if they should be weight-bearing or not. You haven't been given any information at all. So how do you care for them adequately at home? Well, it's no different in mental health, right? Really. You need to have some basic information. You don't need every single detail about every single thing, but you need enough to be able to understand what's going on, to be able to support and care as best you can. And also for your own health and well-being, because we become very stressed when we don't have any information, right? And that is not good for us, and we are part of this whole picture. Okay, so the personal health information sharing requires consent from the patient, and providers should be seeking consent as soon as possible in order to avoid problems. So it should be one of the very first questions they're asking when a patient is coming in to emerge or being admitted or being seen in a clinic. They should be asking the patient, who are your support people? Who are your closest supports? And what information can we share with them? And what do you not want shared? Yes. Please interrupt it anytime you want.
When staff were being trained with all this stuff, I'm sure they must remember, were they helped to know how to phrase that so that it didn't sound like you don't have to provide that information, but, we have to ask it, that kind of thing.
Well, the gist of this is that, and I'm going to kind of tie it up at the end and, and say, where's the nice little piece of paper that describes it? That sort of the general cultural shift we're looking for, what we want people to be keeping in mind, providers to be keeping in mind all the time, is that family and friends are seen as a resource and an asset, not a burden. And that involvement of family and friends is a routine part of care. This is not up for discussion. Families are a routine part of care, and they should be included in treatment and decision-making whenever possible. Clearly, it's going to be impossible to do that if the patient is completely denying consent to share any information. It's going to be pretty tough. But we're working on really sending across the message that this is important. If there are people that are significant in this person's life, they're providing critical support, we know people will recover and do better when they have support. We need to appreciate and value these people and give them, the families and the friends, the support they need. So that's the message, right? We can't tell them the phrase to use. And you can often tell if there's someone in the audience who's kind of balking at this, and those would be the people that I would worry. You might not word this, in the way that we might wish. But I do believe that for the most part, these professionals are hearing the message and will be doing their best to word this in a way, that's going to promote family involvement. So that whole piece of why might it be important for your family to have information? They don't need to have some information that you feel is particularly personal and private, but they need to know some basic information, encouraging that thinking. So is that answer that?
It takes time to change that cultural
It
shift.
sure does.
Are there checks on that? I can't imagine.
Well, we'll get to that.
Okay.
Surveys are part of that accountability. Okay, so families need to know some personal health information. That requires consent from the patient to be shared. The patient identifies any information they don't want shared. We covered that. Consent is documented. We talked about that. When there's a reason to believe there's a risk of harm, which would be significant danger to health or safety of the patient or anyone else, information should be shared with those who need to know in order to minimize or prevent the harm. So, a strong example of this, and you may be able to think of some more common ones, but a very strong and clear example would be if a patient is suicidal. A provider may not necessarily be feeling that this suicide is imminent, as in today. So they may not be feeling that an admission is the best way to go at this point. So it might be a lower risk. So this patient is being sent home from the clinic or whatever, and going to be provided with other supports, come back next week or whatever, or there's a group to attend, whatever. Or if they were in emerge, they're not going to be admitted because the risk is deemed to be not that extreme. Can you send that patient home and that patient says, well, I don't give consent for you to share this information with the people I live with or the people that provide support to me. This needs to be a secret. Can you do that? No, you can't. If there is a risk of harm, a reason to believe there's a risk of harm, then you must share this information with the people who need to know in order to minimize or prevent the harm. And who needs to know are the closest people. We can't help to prevent something as serious as a suicide if we don't know that it's a risk on the table, right? And not everybody, that it's not always plainly visible. So that's one of the things that I know has slipped by before that has actually happened. People have been sent home, family have not been notified. I am hopeful that because that turned out, those situations turn out very badly and people are trying to hold the system accountable, that people are understanding that this is a real risk. You can't play with this and make arbitrary judgments. Okay, so the next sheet is really just it pulls together everything that I told you in a really simple form. I didn't want to just present this because I don't think it's clear enough as the only piece of information that I give you. But as something for you to grab, if you wanted a quick recap, now that you have a better understanding of the information, I think it can work. So very quickly go through it because this is nothing new for you. Top left, public information. We talked about that. That's information that's not confidential. It's about mental illnesses, support services, etc. It doesn't have any identifying information. It doesn't pertain to anyone specifically. It's not private or confidential. Who can it be shared with? The center column, anyone. When can it be shared? Always. So that's straightforward. Then we move down. Far left, personal health information. The personal health information that can be shared with consent only is all that detailed stuff that we talked about, okay? Diagnosis, the treatment that's happening, all those things. Now the consent can be modified at any time. We talked about that and reasons why that might happen. The person can include additional people or request that certain people be removed, not be informed. And it indicates information they want to have shared and with whom. So it kind of is a concise little coverage of that. Who can it be shared with? To those that the person has identified as being part of their circle of support. And also with the SDM stands for substitute decision maker. Do you know what a substitute decision maker is? All of you? Or anybody not? Clear on that? Just quick. When a person is deemed to lack capacity to make decisions regarding their own care, and you have to be pretty ill to be deemed to lack capacity. But if you do, those people would be admitted against their will involuntarily, and a substitute decision maker would be chosen for them, and that substitute decision maker would make significant decisions for that person until they regain capacity to make decisions for themselves. And that person, that substitute decision maker, would need to have information in order to make decisions.
And is that done on paper? Is there like a contract or anything?
It was all documented. Oh yeah, well documented. Okay, so this personal health information gets shared. When can it be shared? When the person gives consent. So quickly moving down, personal health information without consent. This brings us to our general information, which is, as I said, minimal. It only allows you to have information about the presence, the location, and the general condition on that day. Who can it be shared with? With the person's family member or another person, if reasonably believing that they have a close personal relationship with that person. And the provider would be expected to ask reasonable questions. So if you call on the phone, you can't just say, well, I'm their mother. You'd have to explain the relationship and how you're involved in their life, because otherwise anybody could call. Chances of that happening are really minuscule, really. But this is in there because we're just trying to protect people from that, 1 in 100 or 1 in 1,000 or whatever the statistic might be that someone might call wanting information for the wrong reasons. Okay, when can it be shared? In most circumstances, unless specifically prohibited by the person, and people virtually never come in saying you can't even provide general information to my family and friends. In theory, it could happen. But generally, when they say they don't give consent for information, that is considered to be all that other personal health information, and it doesn't include this general piece, okay? And at the bottom of the page, we cover the risk, which is when the provider believes on reasonable grounds that sharing information will help avert or minimize the danger, the people who can be shared with, those who need to know, and when in cases of imminent risk to the person or someone else. So any questions on that? So that's kind of the bulk of it. I have some more to go through here. Yes?
What about information going the other way?
I'm going to do that.
Okay, that's what I want.
Get a great question.
Yep.
Okay. So now that we've covered these guidelines, let's talk about what does it mean? Let's make it practical. So when it comes right down to it, what do we want to know? I'm a family member myself. So what do we want to be able to share, and what do we want to know? How does that work? So our first slide is going to be covering providers listening to family and friends in the circle of support. So this is when we want to give information to them. We want them to listen to us. Okay, first thing to know is that any communication between the family member and the provider is routinely shared with the patient. Okay, why is that? Well, it's because a therapeutic relationship between the patient and the provider is critical. There has to be a relationship of trust and honesty. If that poor patient feels that everybody's going around behind their back talking about them, that's not going to be, a workable relationship between the provider and that patient. So that's why this is there. Okay, it's for honesty. Let's be transparent. Let's be upfront. For the most, as much as we can.
Is that, like, I know this is the Halifax or the Nova Scotia guideline.
Yeah.
Has there been any survey done to see where that particular aspect stands across the country or throughout the world? Because when a person is psychotic and a family member calls and provides the doctor with information, the doctor has a choice of either going and say, well, your mother just called and she said, or they can make inquiries to get the person to tell them.
Yeah.
Okay.
We're going to talk about that. So I just start with the basic premise, which is we have to know as parents going into it, or friends, or we could be taking care of our parents, whatever the situation is. That this is where we start from. Any communication between family and provider is routinely shared with the patient. There's a reason for that, which we talked about. With consent, the family can contact the provider or vice versa to share pertinent information such as family history, symptoms, level of functioning, signs of relapse, and other concerns. Now, the with consent part is a bit of a stickler, okay? So this is why all the agonizing and the arguing that took place when these guidelines, were being developed. So people like me were fighting for what we knew made sense, right? So, where am I here? So patients themselves argued that they needed to have some control over that. So let's say they had a terrible relationship with their mother or their father or their husband or their wife. They don't want, and that could be true, right? They don't want that person calling and giving information that is really maybe not accurate and not fair and not helpful, right? So that's, that could be a real scenario. So that's why this is in there like that. But now we have the but. Without consent, providers can listen to the family when, you guys need to know this, which is the part that bothers me because not everybody knows all of this. But if the family initiates the contact, so using Philip's example, you're worried, you see your son or daughter or mother, father becoming very ill, you don't think the provider is knows that. So the provider is going to inform you at that time that they have a duty of care, their duty of confidentiality is to the patient. That's good, they're just covering their bases. You're going to tell them that the information that you have is required to provide timely and appropriate care. This is critical information. So you're not going to get through this little opening if it's a small thing. So we're not going to, we don't want to be asking for little stuff to be kept confidential. That's not playing the game according to the rules, right? If it's big and it's important, you think your son or daughter, is flushing your medication down the toilet, not taking it. You think they're going to harm themselves. You think, they're becoming increasingly psychotic. They only see their psychiatrist once every 6 months. You need to be able to call and share that information. Yes?
That line, without consent, providers can listen to the family. It strikes me odd that it's the word can. If they want to.
It's never an issue.
Shouldn't it be should or must?
Well, I would say so. But there's always this sort of
That's often
caveat.
the problem, that they don't know.
There's always this little caveat that providers use their clinical judgment. So that's kind of where that fits in. I kind of agree with you. I mean, if it were my choice to make, I would use stronger language. But this is to allow providers to use their own clinical judgment on whether they're going to listen or not. So that's why, as family, we need to be really well informed and educated so that when we make an approach, we know how to present it, right? We've already thought about this is a critical piece of information. It is necessary to be able to, for that provider to give timely and appropriate care, soon enough and appropriate, right? And also, if there's reasonable concern that the information may not have been provided by the patient themselves, right? So if you know that your loved one is going in and telling the doctor this information, then it's not so critical that you call, right? It's when you don't think that information is being shared that you call.
So if you call and say, I have some important information that I think will help you in your assessment, just some background information about the family and so on, and they're not interested, do you have any recourse?
Well, unless the patient has said they do not give consent.
No, I don't mean that.
Okay, if they haven't declined the consent, then you can do that. They can listen to you, right?
But if
It's
they
only
don't,
without
if
consent.
they don't want to,
Listen,
yes, if they're not interested and they don't want to, they decline your offer, what do you do?
well, in a situation where the patient hasn't said that they can't talk to you, and you're having a reasonable conversation with the provider wanting to provide what you feel is important information that is required for timely and appropriate care, is reasonable concern that the information may not have been provided by the patient, or, so I'm down at the bottom of the page there, or it's not possible to collect the information in any other way,
Right.
or the information from the patient may not be accurate,
Right.
right? So with all those pieces, that's even without consent you can share. But with consent, if you've got critical information that's fitting even below there, if you can't share that with a provider, what I would say, in my role as a family support person, I would call the manager.
That's what I did.
Yeah, you have a reasonable conversation at your first level. If you can't work it out, you try to work it out, right? Because best case scenario, you have a nice relationship that you develop over time with the provider, and then they're happy to hear from you, and they're happy to help you. If that's not happening, don't wait around. Go to the next level. Yes.
Yeah, going back to your example, you know that your son or daughter is flushing meds down the toilet, let's say, and your relationship with them may be borderline, and you call the doctor and give the doctor the information. So then the doctor has a duty to turn around to your loved one and say, your father just called and told me that you're flushing your drugs down the toilet?
Philip, you're great.
But is that?
That's coming up 2 pages from now.
I say that every time.
This is why these guidelines were developed, is to cover. That is an excellent question. The reason it's coming up is because it's very, very pertinent.
Yeah,
And so that's what this is. These guidelines are intended to cover. So hang on 1 minute, and we're going to get to that.
Great.
Okay. And the other reason that you will be able to share information without consent at the bottom of the page is there's a safety concern with the provider getting consent from the patient to listen or receive the information from the family. I hate the way that sentence is structured. I really don't know how to fix it, other than to just explain to you. What that means is if there's a safety concern, if the provider is, if you're concerned that the family member, if the provider's concerned that the family member might be in harm's way, if they ask the patient for permission, right? If that would be a very upsetting question, then that would be a reason to not seek the consent or to move past the consent. Does that make sense? Okay, so before we get to what Philip brought up, providers sharing information with family and friends in the circle of support. So as we covered before, most of this is just going to be a quick recap. Providers can always be a source of reliable and accurate public information. That's that stuff that's not confidential. All that information on the internet and in books. With consent, providers can share some personal health information. What can and cannot be shared and who it can be shared with is determined by the patient. We covered that. Without consent, providers can still share general personal health information with family and friends, i.e. the patient's presence, general location, and general condition on that day. With consent to share information, consent to share is a process, not a one-time event, and therefore should be reviewed regularly. We talked about that. And the risk of harm piece, when there's reasonable grounds to believe that there's a risk, and the information is shared with those who can assist in minimizing or preventing it. So we covered all of that. So that's just a nice little sort of pull it all together sheet on providers sharing information. Now, to your question, Philip. When, the whole page devoted to it. When a family requests that information be held in confidence, this comes up all the time. The family should state their wish to have information kept in confidence before disclosing the information and be aware that the provider may not agree to this. And this is where I get worried that families don't know this. How can they know this? But that's what we're trying to do, is get out there and share this with as many people as we can. So if you want something to be kept in confidence, you say that up front, first thing out of your mouth. I have some information to share with you that I think is really important, and I'd like you to keep it in confidence. Okay? Now that's not going to be the whole story, but that's where you start. So they know right off the bat. Then the provider should be saying, because the provider doesn't know whether this really is something that should be kept in confidence. The provider should be saying, reminding the family that patients are routinely told about any communication between the family and the provider. So let's get that out there. When a family requests that information be held in confidence, the reasons why should be discussed before you divulge the information, right? Because if you want it kept in confidence, you want to make your own decision about whether you're going to share that if you think they're going to tell your loved one. You might still want to share it, but you might not, at least today, right? So you want to discuss the reasons why this would be important. We're going to go through some examples of that. And the decision really about that should be made collaboratively. You shouldn't be made to feel that, you're kind of going begging to the provider, please keep this in confidence. It should be more of an equal collaborative discussion. I'd like this kept in confidence. This is why. It's not just for no reason. These are the reasons why. Now, so exceptions, so reasons why, special circumstances when information may be withheld from the patient at the request of the family. So this gives those providers an opening on paper, right, a legal opening. In a crisis situation, family or friends indicate that there's a threat of violence if the information is shared. So you know something about your loved one that you're really worried about, you want to share that information with the provider, and you're concerned that there could be a threat of violence to you because your loved one will become so upset. And you can imagine a scenario, hopefully, where someone is very unwell, and if you say you're going to share some information, they just lose it, right? So if there's a threat of that, then that would be a really good reason to withhold that information for them. If the information shared, and this is more broadly applicable, if information shared would be likely to disrupt the supportive relationship between the patient and the family at the time, so example, cause a significant change in the patient's behavior, like paranoia, increased verbal abuse, then that would be a reason to keep it confidential. And the point trying to be made here is that that supportive relationship needs to be valued. It's a very important relationship. So going back and telling that patient that the family has shared some information with you is going to jeopardize that, because maybe the patient is so unwell, you know, they're so paranoid or they're so delusional that they can't handle that. And they may leave home, or you know, the living situation may become so untenable that, you know, it can't continue. All kinds of terrible things could happen. So that would be a really good reason, and a much more commonly applicable reason to ask for information to be kept in confidence. And in these special circumstances, the provider may use, you know, we can't say should, may use clinical judgment and delay sharing the information until the patient has recovered enough to reflect on the situation.
According to Subu's opinion.
The provider. Yeah. But what we're trying to do here is get everybody on the same page, right? So that providers begin to see the big picture. They begin to see the role that families play, and you do not jeopardize these supportive relationships just because of something called confidentiality. Here's when we jump back to Meriden, and Meriden come in here and they're saying, wow, you guys have this confidence thing is a huge barrier. You won't even share information when the patient gives you permission. Come on. Develop some guidelines. Use some common sense. Be guided by how are we going to get to the best outcome? But still respect the rights of patients and the needs of families. What is going to contribute to that best outcome? Okay? So, any questions about that? Does that clarify that?
Very well,
Yeah, and as I said, keep in mind that second last point in particular. Obviously, if there's a threat of violence, you know, that's an easy one to say you need to keep this confidential. But the second one down, second last one, is the one that if you think about it, could be a lot more broadly applied, right? So that is that information. Any questions about that? Concerns about that?
Did the NSHA commit to the complete training by Meriden clinicians, parents?
Well, what happened was the government got involved and provided some financial support and some backing, wanting this to be done. And so did the Mental Health Foundation. They put up some money, because money is always an issue, right? To hire people, trainers to come and train is an expensive endeavor. So there was money that was injected into this a few years ago. And a number of providers here locally were trained in doing family work, which is a structured program that Meriden has that gives providers a structured way of working with the whole family together. So it's meant to be the patient and the whole family all working together on very practical kinds of things. It can be very, very helpful in a practical way. So there was a lot of training done. Not everybody was trained, but some key people were trained. Donna and I were both trained as well in this family work. We were trained as trainers as well, so that what we wanted to do was build capacity here, so that we wouldn't have to have Meriden always coming over, you know, very expensive, and doing our training for us. Once we had a core group of people on the ground here, we could do our own training. So we went over and took a training for trainers course. How do you train people locally? We were also trained to provide a whole bunch of people, including families, were trained to provide Families Matter and Mental Health, which is the 11-week program for families, which is offered broadly all throughout the year. So we as trainers can also train other people to do that, to provide that program, because it is a structured program. And what we know from evidence, Meriden pointed this out to us, it's not their evidence, but it's evidence that's out there. What we know is that when families are provided with psychoeducation that includes information on skills around communication and problem solving, coping skills, relapse and relapse prevention, you can actually decrease rates of hospitalization. You can actually measurably affect that. It's not, going to solve everything, but it does create measurable differences. So this structured 11-week program contains that kind of education. It's not just general mental health education. And so the idea is that if families have more skills, that we will be able to do a better job, because truly, how do we know how to best support our loved ones? There's no manual that comes with being a parent in general. There's certainly no manual for supporting a loved one who's got a mental health problem. So, yeah, so did I answer your question?
Yeah, is that going to be an ongoing process, like as you and Donna?
Okay, yes, exactly.
What happens when you and Donna resign?
Well, good question. With this whole switch over to the Nova Scotia Health Authority, of course, it's costing lots of money, and a lot of energy is now going into that. So this is a little bit on the side burner now. We're hoping it's not going to completely disappear. But right now there's no more funding for more training. This is kind of what we are continuing to have to fight for. Okay, so I have maybe 2 minutes. Yes?
Oh, yeah.
2?
You're good.
I just wanted to talk to you because I think that this ties in. It's a bit of a key piece to the accountability part of not only the guidelines around confidentiality, but also providers needing skills, needing to be trained in skills to work with families. Because we know that when providers are going through their training programs, whether it's to be a nurse or a doctor or a social worker or whatever, until very recent years, they were not really getting any training in how to work with families, and that they even should be working with families. It's starting to happen now a bit. But most of the providers that we have had no training. So in their defense, they don't really know how to work with us in a meaningful and helpful way. A lot of them still think that if they say, hey, hi, introduce themselves, let us give them a little bit of background information, give us the bare minimum of information, and then shoo us on our way, that's family involvement. That's patient family-centered care right there. Well, it's not. That is just barely skimming the surface of it. So, we're looking for a huge culture change. This is only one part of it. This takes the barrier down from talking to families and listening to families, hopefully. But it's going to take a lot of time, and you guys need to be strong and knowledgeable so that you know how to fight for what you need and what you should have. Now, another offshoot of Meriden having come here was that we wanted to develop mental health and addictions surveys, experience surveys, not just for the patients, and that's really important. There were always surveys for patients, but they weren't very good. And even the system said, we're not getting useful information from these surveys. So what we said was that we also need family experience surveys in order to find out what the experience of families is. Are they being involved in care? Are you struggling? Are good things happening? If so, what are they? If difficult things are happening, we need to know what they are, right? So there is, and I ran out of paper at home, so I printed this off. But you can go online and find this. I got this. This is online, available to the public. But you would never know it unless I came here and told you, which drives me crazy that we can't somehow post this more generally. These are the results of the family and friends experience. Right, actually, it's all of them. It's the patient and family experience survey results. If you go on to Nova Scotia Health Authority, and then you pick Capital District Health Authority, CDHA, and then you put in the question box, experience surveys, a whole list of them will come up, and the mental health, addictions and mental health surveys will come up. And you can print the surveys, and you can fill, you can fill one out online, but you can also get the results, okay, this report. And it's interesting. This one has been written for the public because reams of statistics and stuff is not very helpful for you. But there are some percentages here. And toward the back, I have an extra page in here. There is a section on family and friends experience survey results specifically, what the top strengths are and what the top areas for improvement are. And these a more detailed version of these has gone to the whole mental health program. But if you guys want to have a quick look at this and then know that you can go home and get your own,
Is it ended or is it ongoing still?
oh no, this continues. So that would be my very last point to make tonight before I quiet down and stop talking. So much to tell you. This is really important. I am on this feedback and experience action team, the committee that developed the surveys that Wendy mentioned at the beginning. And that also we review, we're a group of families, patients, and providers. We review the survey results every year, and we assist in developing recommendations. Okay? So I know for a fact that our numbers of patient surveys are not great either, the numbers of them. But the numbers of family surveys are very, very low. We need numbers, because think about it. If we only have 100, that is not statistically significant. That information is not reliable and valid. And from the results I've seen, I fear, I don't know this, but I fear that the families who are struggling the most have already been pushed out, do not feel included. They're not filling out surveys. So we need all of that information, and we need you to fill one out. You can fill one out every year, because we look at information from last year, then we're going to look at information this year and next year. And your input is part of that year, whether, as long as your loved one is continuing to receive care, your experiences may be the same, in which case we need to know that. We need to know what was good, what wasn't good, and we need to know what wasn't helpful so that we can change it.
And I think that my experience in serving on the Quality Care Acute Committee,
Yeah.
We were talking about surveys at the last meeting we had, and they were saying how difficult it is to get patients to fill out the surveys. They can't make them do it. So, and I mean, I can imagine, like, there they have the health team is trying to get them, really encouraging them to get the surveys done. And I wasn't even thinking about the families aspect of that. So that's got to be, from their point of view, it's got to be a top priority as well, to get the families to respond so that we know what's going on.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. Your voice does matter. I know it's frustrating and change doesn't happen fast, but your voice really is important, and we've got to stick with it. This kind of change takes years, but it is beginning. Things have changed. Not enough, but they're changing. So, yes.
Well, it's a question for someone online.
Oh, okay.
They wanted to know how the guidelines affect minors.
How they affect minors? Oh, good question.
It could be maybe a whole other hour.
No, not at all. No, not at all. Because from my understanding, what I can tell you is that these guidelines, as they stand now, apply to the adult mental health patients, the people seen in the adult program, not to the patients that are seen at the IWK or elsewhere by a child psychiatrist. Now, the intention to roll these surveys out across the province, which is beginning, that's going to happen. Now, what will happen in terms of the tiers, the adult and the child system? I don't know if they're going to feel that they need to have their own surveys. Was that the question? Was it about surveys?
Actually, no, it's about all of
Oh,
this.
it's about the guidelines.
Yeah.
Well, same thing with the guidelines. These are being rolled out across the province. Again, developed for the adult system. It may take some time to see if because you can't force people, to see if the child and adolescent system will adopt these as well. So for now, I would say that they don't necessarily apply, but they sure are a good starting point. And I think if you have this information, then you have a way of approaching a conversation and asking for information and maybe challenging the system if you're not getting what you need or you're hitting roadblocks. That might be helpful. That's all I can tell you.
So we understand that if they are minor at this point, the family is okay to get information about their consent. I mean, they don't have to give consent because they are minors?
No, you might think that.
Yeah. Yes, I would.
what I hear is that, in many cases, families are involved without a whole lot of difficulty, but not in all cases. If you have an adolescent, and you can imagine it could well happen, who is having has a tenuous relationship with parents because of the illness or because of behaviors that are difficult, then those adolescents could be doing the same thing as the adults are doing and say, I don't consent. In which case, those providers are likely to feel pressured. They're not, you don't have to be 19 to have control over your healthcare decisions. So they could shut that communication down at a younger age.
Would that be legally binding though for the caregivers if they're not?
I'm not sure what the age is, but it's way lower than 19. Yeah, kind of scary.
Yeah. Yes. Any other questions for Dani? Are you finished?
I'm done.
So that was very informative. Thank you very
Well,
much.
good, and I hope it kind of made sense.
All righty.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, so nice to see you.
Oh, good. Okay, great. Well, that is the end of the webcast for tonight. And when will it be up and running, archive?
Should be what's today, tomorrow or the next day at the very latest.
Tomorrow or the next day. So if you've missed anything or want to review anything, you can catch up on the archive. Okay, that's it for tonight. Thanks very much.